Hi, it's Alexander Russo with The Grade, and this is the Education Show. I'm delighted to be here with AP's education reporter, Bianca Vazquez Toness, who's just put out an amazing new piece. Bianca, welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
In case someone doesn't know who you are or where you're from and how you do the great journalism that you do, can you tell us a little bit of your background? I think you were originally a healthcare reporter or maybe international affairs?
No, well, I've done everything, it feels like. I've written about education off and on since I was a cub reporter in Yakima, Washington.
Wow.
I did do a number of international since I started my career in Mexico City, um, working for an English language daily there, which was a blast and wild. And I've was in public radio for a long time. I covered the Indian tech world for a while. I've done a lot of different things.
Wow.
But in the most recent years, I've written about education and accountability, uh, both in public radio and in print. And now I'm at the Associated Press, where I've been for 3 years.
Great. And geographically, I'm in Brooklyn, where so many people are. Where are you geographically?
I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Excellent. You have just written a story about a family in Atlanta. It came out last week. I hope everyone's been reading it and enjoying it. I certainly did. Can you tell us a little bit about your latest story, just the gist of what you found and what the story's about?
Sure. I wrote about a family of four, a mom, 3 sons, who were at a critical crossroads. They were facing eviction. Well, actually, they had been evicted already the
Right.
year before. And because of that, they were living in another community. And her kids had been eligible to keep attending their schools in Atlanta public schools, um, because they were considered homeless and they had this right to keep attending them until the end of the year. So it was her goal to get them back into their schools in Atlanta, to be able to send them, to have the right to send them there. So she did everything she could over the summer and even accepted an apartment that really didn't make her comfortable, just so she could keep sending her kids to the same schools to keep them stable.
Right. The other option would be to move somewhere else that would be easier, but wouldn't have the continuity.
Exactly. And well, she already lived in the other place. She could have just sent them to the local schools, but it was her observation that, and she didn't read the studies, right? There are studies that say this, that say that kids who change schools a lot have, worse outcomes, right? But she didn't need anyone to tell her that. She had observed that in her own life with her older son. So she was trying to keep them stable so they would stay in the same, know the same adults. She had observed that her older son was able to hide when he changed schools because adults didn't really know him, right? They couldn't diagnose what was going on with him and really work on him and help him. So she wanted to keep them in the same school. She also observed that there weren't as many resources outside of school. Also in school, right? There are not as many teachers, there are not as many social workers, psychologists, that sort of thing. But she also observed that there weren't as many resources in the community, like
Right.
rental assistance
Right.
and food pantries.
Did she or did you use the phrase resource desert? I'd never heard that before.
She did.
There's schools everywhere, but the amount of resources in the schools and the surrounding community are obviously very different. Every story you work on is a little bit different, and the reaction is a little bit different. You learn things. You have to go left. You have to go right. What was new or different to you about this story? And then what is new or different about the reaction that it's gotten so far?
What was new about it? It was new that, I really struck gold with this family because they were incredibly talkative and open, and wanted to share what was going on with them. So I was really, I was privy to a lot. um, both in person and on the phone. Um, and so that's a blessing and a curse to some extent, because you also just sort of don't, it's hard to keep up sometimes because things would change quickly. And also sometimes it's hard to know where the story is going, because you aren't assessing it at the end when you know what the result is. You're following every turn, every decision, every um, you know setback, every victory, or what seems like a victory but then turns into, I mean, it's just, and it's a roller coaster.
Yeah, it's real life in some regards, right?
It is real life. It
How
is a
did
roller coaster.
how did you decide to write this kind of story next? You've written so many stories. You and your teammates' efforts won Pulitzer recognition a year and a half ago or so. How did you decide that this was an important story to be told now? And what's the reaction been so far from the people in the story and from the surrounding communities or the readership?
We decided, um, probably last year around this time, that housing was something we wanted to focus on. Um, and uh, but we also knew that Trump was being elected, and we didn't know what the world would look like, to be honest, and what the most important story would be. Um, and uh, but we kept following some of the housing things that we were interested in. I think that this is, and one of the reasons we want to focus on it is that we know a lot about the impact of eviction on people generally. Right? We know because of the great work that Matthew Desmond has done and that book Evicted, and other stories. We know a lot about that, but we don't know that much about what actually happens to kids and their learning outcomes or other measures of well-being. People haven't written as much about that. We know that it's bad because we hear about it from teachers, and principals, but people haven't written about it through the eyes of kids and parents, specifically about what's going on with their kids. So that's why we wanted to do it. As far as the reaction, I've gotten a lot of reaction from teachers and people, or former teachers, who've said, I had 10 kids like this
Right.
in the school where I used to teach, and now I want to become an attorney to work on eviction. Or this is a thank you for writing about this thing that we can't solve. We see this all the time, and it's incredibly frustrating to teach someone and then have them disappear, right? Because they're going to another school district, and see them, and see the churn that happens just because of housing instability, or have a student who gets to school really late or doesn't come to school at all because they're living really far away, and they haven't, they're still attending through McKinney-Vento, or maybe they don't have McKinney-Vento rights that allow them to keep going to school in their old district, but their parents are driving from really far away to get them to school, and sometimes they're just exhausted.
Right.
So I think teachers and educators know about this, but a lot intimately. Um, but people haven't been writing about it as much as I think we should.
Is there a connection, a line that we can draw in between the previous story about enrollment difficulties, which
Mm.
also included the Atlanta area, as I recall? Is there a line that we can draw between, you've written about enrollment struggles that parents have, especially parents who are on the move. You've written about missing kids who are missing or disengaged or just can't be accounted for. Can you help me draw a line between your previous stories and this one, if there is such a line to be drawn?
Oh yeah, there's a big line. So I knew that this problem existed intellectually, right? Just from hearing from teachers over the years. But it wasn't until we did the project looking for kids who disappeared during the pandemic, did it really penetrate for me just how much housing affected young people's well-being and their schooling. So it wasn't until so there were two stories I did during that project that brought it home to me, and it made me understand it my inside. One was about a young man who was, I think, 15 at the time, and he and his mother lived doubled up with his younger sister in a very small apartment with a hostile roommate.
Oh, right.
And right, he didn't go to school because he wanted to prevent his hostile roommate from locking them out of the house. So to prevent losing his home, he didn't go to summer school, which he needed to do to be able to advance to the next grade, because he'd already missed a lot of school because of housing related stuff. So so there was that story that told that, and other stories that we're hearing too, in addition to that, just people moving during the pandemic. And so it seemed that some of the worst scenarios during the pandemic were when the school closed and kids had some sort of disruption at home, right? So both of those things paired together were really devastating for kids. So, and then there was the other story in Atlanta where because of Atlanta's intense policy framework that it asks people to keep proving their residency in certain areas of Atlanta where schools are in really high demand, it makes it hard for some people to prove that they live there, and even gives principals discretion to ask for even more documentation than the standard Atlanta policy. So that is where I also learned a lot about how hard it is for some parents just to stay in that district to prove that their kids belong in the district. And that's where I met the parent who actually introduced me to Sashita McNair. She herself started off as an advocate for parents. Like many advocates, she was helping people get special education services. But then she had a housing problem, and she fell into into this situation herself and realized that all these people around her were. So then she started helping people prove their residency and keep their kids in school. And so what started off as normal sort of run-of-the-mill special education advocacy became just enrollment advocacy.
The piece is so human, so nuanced, so detailed, so messy in some ways, as is real life. It was a delight to read, and it seemed to me, at least, to be a great example of your writing and also of the AP education team approach to covering education. I have my own thoughts about what that means, but I'm curious, how do you see yourself and the team's coverage being different? What makes it different, either intentionally or just because of the way you're wired?
I think that I've been given permission, and I won't speak for the whole team necessarily, but I think that we've definitely been given permission to see education as not just things that happen, in schools, and to see our work sometimes at looking at the intersection of well-being and education, children's well-being, and to look at things that have, because I some people might say this isn't really an education story, but I think that we've taken a different approach to that.
Right, it's a much more holistic approach. In some ways, it isn't an education story in the narrowest sense, and in fact, there's no clear action for a school district to take that I could glean from the latest story. There are lots of actions that mayors could take or elected officials could take. And in some ways, it's very timely because it's about affordability and stability. It's an affordability story, right? In some ways, and that's obviously a timely thing, but it's not narrowly educational, and it's also not, frankly, culture wars or Trump administration related. It's timeless in that sense. Is that fair?
Oh, completely. No, and in fact, there were, she doesn't receive SNAP benefits. Like there was something really very timely about, what's going on, with the shutdown. The shutdown didn't really affect her very much. No, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't say that it was. It's definitely not about the culture war or about the Trump administration.
Right.
No.
Yeah. When I read your work, this piece especially, I think about Eli Saslow. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, or John Woodrow Cox. People who write deeply nuanced portraits that don't have a particular aren't so beat specific. And on one hand, it's lovely to read. On the other hand, I worry about sort of losing the beat getting lost in the desire to cover schools in all their messy context. Do you think about that? Do you and your colleagues talk about how to push the edges but still stay in the frame?
I think I think one story or a few stories doesn't define, the rest of my
No.
the rest. Yeah. First of all, I'm very flattered to be compared to Eli Saslow. I mean, he's a hero. I think he does amazing work, and I admire it tremendously. And but I hear you about losing the beat and that concern.
Well, one of the nice things, of course, is, as you said, you're not just writing one story; you're writing a bunch of them, and also you're part of a team. And I'm, contradicting myself because I'm complimenting the team for not being so focused on what's happening at the U.S. Department of Education, but I'm also saying, please don't go too far away. So I apologize for that. I think it's fascinating and important. I hadn't tracked, frankly, and I don't actually know the numbers, that eviction. I knew it was an ongoing concern, and instability and homelessness, obviously. Is there a spike in this? Are you worried about there being a spike when the AI bubble pops? Where is eviction and housing instability now in 2025?
Oh, I don't have the numbers top of mind, but I suppose the AI bubble could certainly affect it. But no, I'm definitely very concerned that it's going to keep. And I think that if you look at hearing rates or the number of hearings and how crowded they are, just hearing from Sashida, her visits to eviction court, it is, in certain cities especially, this is a big problem for sure.
And you mentioned that Atlanta's gentrifying, which usually pushes some of these things to surge. You mentioned Matt Desmond. I wanted to ask about that connection. Matthew Desmond. I interviewed him a few years ago, and a few years ago there was a bit of coverage connecting housing and schools. The connection is obvious for so many reasons. Did you work with him? Did you read him? Is he sort of behind the scenes as a thought partner in this piece?
I read him. Yes, I read him, and I've read, a couple of books by him, and my colleague Mariah Belingett wrote a story with based on eviction lab data that we got exclusively, and we've talked to them about their research. So they were definitely informing how we thought about our stories.
Tell me a little bit, if you don't mind. We talked a little bit about Eli Saslow's work. Are there other journalists who you admire or seek to emulate, either present day or journalists of the past? Do you have other favorites?
I've always admired Catherine Boo a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, she and Eli Saslow. I am interested in how people live and the impact of poverty on people's lives. And I think that they've done it with a great deal of care and dignity, and that's important to me.
I know you're not covering education locally, but you're still in the Boston area. I'm curious what you see or wish you saw in terms of education coverage locally. It's a very expensive part of the world to live in. There's an enormous number of newcomers from all sorts of places in Boston these days. Do you get a chance to look at the coverage? Do you think there are issues related to Boston or New England that are important in your real non-journalist life or in the community around you?
I think they've done a very good. I think they've done a good job writing about immigrants attending schools around in this area. I do think, this is from my perspective on thinking about housing and enrollment. I think there are some threads there to follow that would be. There was a good story a few years ago. I think it was in the Globe about. I think there was a lawsuit in the end about immigrants being kept out of school because of enrollment policies. And I think that a lot of these enrollment policies have proliferated around Massachusetts districts. I think there's some stories to be done there. I mean, eviction is a big problem in Boston, and people are going to places, to other less resource districts. That's part of why I was interested in this Atlanta story and this housing story, is I've seen this happen here where people get pushed out of Boston. I mean, it's a great place to be when you don't have a lot of resources. There are a lot of wonderful organizations in Boston that pour resources into kids, and the school district has a lot of resources, right? I think that's a place where I would want to be if I were a parent and wanted my kid to have access to a lot of great things. But people get pushed out into communities that spend half as much money on kids and don't have those resources.
Wow. Oh, I hadn't realized it was quite that stark. Boston, like San Francisco, is a geographically tiny district surrounded by a lot of other school districts. Is Atlanta similarly set up, or is Atlanta Public Schools a big southern sort of countywide metro area?
Countywide metro area. So Atlanta is itself, within Atlanta.
Right.
And then there's Fulton County Public Schools, and then other huge, pretty big school districts that are countywide.
Does it make a difference housing wise or resource wise when you've got smaller districts like in Boston and San Francisco, or larger districts like it sounds like the character in the story you just wrote, there was a resource cliff, even with a bigger county kind of setup. Does it make a difference, generally speaking, or is that something that I don't know and you don't know either?
I think it just depends on the county, right? I mean, I think she moved to one of the poorest counties in this. I mean, one of the poorer counties in the state, right? So I think it just depends on the county
Right.
and the yeah, it's place specific.
Well, I'm always so happy to see your work. I'm a big fan of yours, as you know by now. I'm a big fan of the AP education team. I'm so glad that it's surviving and even thriving. I've got my fingers crossed for the Globe education team that you were on for a while. They've been doing some great work, and I hope they name a new person to head it soon, and Mandy McLaren replacement, if such a thing is possible. What happens next for you and the ed team? Are you already working on a new story that you can or cannot tell us about? Is the ed team doing something interesting or new we should look forward to?
I don't think I can speak about it, but yeah, no, I think that you'll see more schools related coverage. I will say that.
I go
More
back.
school.
I go back and forth on this topic. I feel like the experience you're having is something I've seen other journalists experience before, which is realizing the limits of narrowly school-specific coverage, and then they sort of go deep down a rabbit hole. It could be around housing or food or segregation or any other important topic, and then the magic key is keeping that little tether line back to school so that people can read the story and go, oh, this is a school story underneath it all. At least that's what I hope to or love to see. Though I'm
No, I think you're great.
About this.
Well, I think here's the problem, right? If you stay in that world that is a bit more holistic, let's call it, and less divorce, I think that you also lose sight of story ideas and what's happening and the real the changing nature of schools, right? So you need to dip back into that well to understand what's going on, what the problems are, what or the solutions that people are seeking, or the cultural changes that are happening. I think I'd like to go back and forth. I think it's helpful to dip in and out.
As you do. I so look forward to your next story. I so appreciate you talking with me about your work and how you think about and how you do your work. Bianca Vazquez Toness of the AP Education team. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alexander.